Yeah, hi everybody, and thank you very much for having me and also my colleague Lily, who is also here. I'm going to give kind of a whistle-stop tour, a bit of what we do and a bit of things we find at schools, and I think it aligns really nicely actually with some of the things that have just been discussed in terms of kind of engagement, community, and all those bits. But I'm going to apologise now because I'd love to talk to you for like an hour and I'm trying to squeeze a lot into 15 minutes. So I'll kind of rapidly hop through things. But yeah, I hope that you sort of enjoy and get something out of it. So first up is who is RAFT for context. We are an architecture-led multidisciplinary practice. We concentrate on retrofit of schools, but also kind of equally important to that is the education around sustainability and retrofit. So in our team, we don't just have kind of architects and architectural assistants, we also have a former teacher and Lily, our engagement lead. So it's such a core part of what we do. And then I suspect because you're all in this network that you know what retrofit is, but just to make sure we're starting from a kind of everybody having the same understanding footing. So we say building retrofit, could also be termed thermal energy upgrade. It's a set of measures and they can be physical, like insulation, or operational, maybe like some of the tweaks you might do through energy sparks that Rebecca mentioned. And they can combine to, reduce bills, improve comfort, improve well-being, or reduce energy use generally. Also making more resilient. And then deep retrofit is where we're looking at a building in a really holistic way. And we are reducing the consumption sometimes by up to 60 to 70%, depending on what type of building is it and what opportunities there are generally. And probably the key word to take away from today for everybody, for me, would be holistic, just kind of thinking about a building as a whole system and not just as bits and pieces that can be retrofitted. So a little bit of context is retrofit is very much our lives at RAFT. This is my director's home, and you can see he's mid-retrofit there with one of the first passive house and a fifth step-by-step retrofits in the UK. So we kind of live it, breathe it, and are hugely passionate about it. So something else we're really passionate about is retrofit communication, because I think it's easy for things to get technical and feel difficult. And again, bringing people along is really important. So we're developing these sort of comic strips as part of a soon-to-be published book about home retrofit. Though I will say that our focus is schools, but obviously homes relate to more of the population, so hence the focus there. But you see in that kind of page that, there's air quality, there's mold, there's damp, there's comfort, there's cold. It's not just sustainability, and although sustainability is hugely important, it's really easy to get caught up in just the kilowatt hours and not the co-benefits, including, climate, comfort, and those other things. Something else we're really passionate about is understanding that buildings have layers. These are kind of two identical terraces represented. One used as it might be used as the past, where perhaps most of the moisture use is outside the building in the outhouse, whereas now we're using buildings very differently for how we might have been when they were constructed. And then I've also had lots of changes and layers of change. So getting to know buildings, really understanding them, because that changes how they might kind of deal with and respond to measures and what opportunities might be there for taking. Something else, again, banging on about my favorite word, holistic. In the context of this, it's about having a whole house plan. In the context of a school, it would be having a whole school plan. So really looking through having a sense of, the context, any existing defects, the energy bills data before any changes and after any changes, kind of detailed surveys and analysis, and just really knowing a building and knowing where the opportunities might lie. And again, we're very passionate about looking at a whole building rather than just looking at kind of bits and pieces to make sure that we're being holistic. So something else linking more to the adaptation and resilience is a kind of the co-benefits of retrofit. And sometimes it might be simple of this building on the right. This is, RAFT's Dream Street, where people are retrofitting, they're maintaining their character and personality of these buildings. And they're also increasing their climate adaptation. You've got shading from either shades or from trees. You've got kind of the co-benefit of green careers and knowledge, improved comfort, all of those things that kind of go together alongside the pure technical dry aspect of retrofit. So in terms of what we do, you've kind of gathered building retrofit, a huge amount of community engagement, and then research on net zero carbon and other bits. And I'll go relatively fast through this, but kind of in line with that is kind of, we think to have a huge amount of impact, we want to have our fingers in quite a lot of these pies. So I'm just gonna mute someone there, and make sure that kind of, you know, large reach. So that reach might be helping an estate, for example, a local council or a diocese plan across their whole estate, how they might approach schools, where the funding opportunities might be, to looking at individual schools. Or it might be developing guidance for an organisation that's more kind of generically spread. So skipping on here, we're also at the moment in the midst of our low carbon skills fund preparation. I don't know if anybody's come across that or aware of it, but it's the government funding for kind of decarbonisation planning, and that's probably announced fairly soon. And we're also on site with a couple of projects where we've got funding through with schools, and yeah, really happy that they're very almost complete, and yeah, just lovely to see projects happening, retrofits happening at schools. So sorts of things we find at schools. One thing is that, you know, schools can be quite complicated and there's lots of different construction types, and we want to kind of analyze them, think about them, and identify them all together. And obviously some schools are much more simple, but it's just starting with a base point of understanding the buildings is hugely important. When we're looking at buildings, things we might find can be quite surprising. This is a school that was built in 2011. When we had a look at it, we found that there was no insulation in the walls at all. So immediately there's a great opportunity there for cavity wall insulation. Little but coming up is that when we have a look at the cavity, we can see that at the bottom it's full of rubble. So thinking holistically, we need to make sure that that full cavity is checked out. It's all clean and clear before any retrofit can happen, to make sure that the insulation doesn't mix with the rubble and it acts as we would want. Oh, I didn't realize that was a video. There we go. And another image, this is an image of a wall being repointed. And this is representing the fact that buildings need to be retrofit ready. So you want buildings to be in good condition, and particularly rainwater goods and pointing, to make sure that they're not using more energy than they already should. And that if you are considering any retrofit measures to walls, that your building is kind of resilient and able to take those and accommodate those. Another interesting finding at schools is kind of maybe where I'd say know your buildings and make sure you keep knowing your buildings, because this was a ceiling where blue is cold, red is hot. And according to the school, this ceiling was insulated, and they were partially right, except at some point in time, somebody or somebodies have been up into that ceiling and needed access and messed with the insulation. So a really easy win for this ceiling is for the insulation to be tidied up, assuming obviously that there's safe access. So sometimes you might think one thing about a school building, but actually in a space that's not accessed very much, you might occasionally be surprised. Another surprise here was a new building, which was built, I think, in 2018, where when RAFT had a look, there was no insulation in the ceiling at all. What was fantastic about this is that the building was still within its defects period, so it was caught and identified, and the builder had to come and add the insulation in. But I think it's just knowing your buildings is really, really key, I think, is the message there. Then something else that we like to talk about is evidence-led approach, and this relates to co-benefits of retrofit. And this is an air quality graph, and in this graph you see that the air quality was over the recommended kind of pollutants levels for over 5 hours a day in a classroom. And that's a really common thing, and retrofit actually is a great trigger point for dealing with those sorts of issues, or vice versa. And so in this instance, actually, they were able to evidence the kind of the poor air quality and the effects on learning, and were able to get a particular type of ventilation put in, mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, which also saves the heat. And the head teacher there is really passionate about the impact on learning that it's had on those students. So for us, like, you know, sustainability is massive, but learning environment is also massive, and we don't want to kind of divorce the two from each other. Another little observation that was made at a school, and lots of schools, is radiators. And this is just a lovely case of kind of the opportunity that occasionally comes with decarbonisation. So this was a school where the radiators were 120 years old. They were not in great condition, and the school got funding to get a heat pump. But obviously, heat pumps need really good radiators and often need larger radiators. And rather than replace all the radiators, the school managed to get public sector funding to get their radiators refurbished, and then just a few additional radiators. So these are their 120-year-old radiators, maintaining that character of the school, not wasting any material, and kind of, you know, the school looking a lot better than it had in the long term. So that kind of co-benefit of retrofit and making sure that the heat pump would work with it, and that's a real joy to us. And then in terms of kind of people and joy, very much echoing Rebecca, is pupils engage so fantastically with their buildings, as I'm sure you'll know from all of your schools. This is from a Follow the Heat workshop at a primary school, and even just getting them into the boiler rooms where safe to do so is fantastic. Getting them to really understand the ecosystem of fuel and heat and machinery, and think about where it comes from. And it's just a massive learning opportunity that we think those sorts of little kind of real connections will stick with those children for a long time, because they'll be really memorable days, and so hugely passionate about it. This one makes me laugh. It's children doing a waste audit at a school, and you'll notice an apple. And if you're very eagle-eyed, you'll also notice that all of the pupils have written apple at the top of their list, because they were all outraged that the apple was in the wrong bin. And this links again to that kind of power that you all have as schools, and that network factor. And this is an image of a different school, but a similar scenario where pupils found out during one of their waste audits that they didn't have any food recycling at their school from the council. They wrote to the council with a very passionate teacher who helped them, and now all schools in their areas have access to food waste recycling. So, you know, it seems like it's a half-hour lesson, but no, it's not a half-hour lesson. They go home, they're passionate, and they do sometimes make change, and it's really empowering for them to see that. Something else is just getting hands-on with pupils, and particularly if we are looking at retrofitting a school, making sure that it's used as a learning opportunity for the pupils as well. So this was part of the baked potato challenge, where pupils make a house for their baked potatoes, and there's a bit of a competition as to whose potato can lose the less heat. And obviously there's a huge amount of learning to do with building physics and heat and temperature and units of energy, lots of links to the curriculum there. And again, like Rebecca was saying with that campaign, is bringing in as much as possible is fantastic. And on learning, we are really passionate, and again, this links to your training days, about premises manager and senior leadership manager training. And we've been running it, and it sounds like you actually probably already do, but we really encourage you to make sure that premises managers, caretakers are included in any training and things, because they are the guardians of heat and energy at the school, and they are often really motivated, and they often really want to sit in a room with the SLT to kind of talk about plans and to buy into the plans. And probably my main takeaway from these sessions is actually also the value that they got from training, and the sense of belonging that often premises managers are a little bit in their own silo and feel a bit disconnected. And so just involving them in sustainability-based planning and training is huge. And if you do end up retrofitting a school, they are one of the absolute most valuable key players. So very conscious of time, so I might skip over these. These are a few other bits you probably get a sense from the images. And last up, I'm just going to skip forward to something that we're working on at the moment. And we are, you've probably gathered, but we are super passionate to sort of reach as many schools as possible and to help schools really think holistically about their buildings. And so we're developing an online tool called the Zero Carbon Action Planner. And the idea of it is that it's a tool to help schools, particularly, well, schools that know their building well, but also schools that don't have an equivalent kind of support of some professionals to start really getting to know their building. Because the questions that I imagine everybody asks a lot is, where do we start? How do we decide which actions to take? How do we know what the risk points are? And so the idea with this is that it's an online tool where you can put in quite a detailed building audit. It helps you to understand your school buildings. Again, some schools have a really good understanding of their school buildings already, some schools less so. And then it basically develops from whatever inputs you put about your school, it develops a kind of school-specific action plan, although obviously, you know, it doesn't know your buildings well, but it suggests actions that are likely to be applicable to your school, can identify some funding avenues. It will also have some teaching resources. And then one of the main things is, again, is the sharing and engaging in that community power, the PESTA power, and that kind of reaching lots of people and tracking. And I'd say on tracking, I suspect anybody in this network already does, but I know, Rebecca, you mentioned Energy Sparks earlier, and we think they're fantastic. But really encourage you to track your energy now, but also if you do make changes, really keep tracking your energy and kind of keep understanding and use it to motivate you to do more. And conscious that I'm probably about 30 seconds over and I've gone at breakneck speed, but I hope that was useful, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you so much. We just have one question. So was it a thermal camera on a phone, those photos?
Yeah, I think that one was. I think that was from memory. That one was actually before my time. That was when you could get these little cameras that plug into iPhones. I have a feeling that because the socket on iPhones have changed, I'm not sure they're currently available. But they're called FLIR, those particular ones. But
So I've actually got one. I work. I'm on the climate action group for my parish council, and we go out and we've been surveying houses using those cameras. They are really cool, and you can take pictures on your phone and then send the pictures to the people, you know, to let them know where they need to perhaps do some work. So and I don't have an iPhone. I've just got a basic Android.
Fantastic. It's FLIR. Rosie. And just to say what's lovely about them, and I shouldn't take any more time, is sometimes they take pictures of things you already know, and it's evidencing the things that you know perfectly well about your building. Anyway, I'll be quiet now because I'm aware you've got a lot to